Session,
Second.
moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Any changes to the order of business? Okay. Public appearances, actually we have one. There we go. Pete Carnes. Please state your name and address. And then address, please.
Pete Carnes, 4811 Gordon, Monona. I just have a couple of items. One of the things I've heard in local meetings that I've been to is that some facilities, AKA the school buildings, are getting old. Instead, think Madison East. I believe that was built in 31. I didn't research this, but that's just my recollection. Or think the high school in this county, in the whole county, including the suburbs, with the highest ACT scores year after year, Madison West. I believe that was 28. Both of these high schools will soon be 100 years young. Age doesn't matter. Item 2, on your tonight's agenda, item L5, which is perhaps purchasing some or selling some school district land out in Cottage Grove. Is it best from a safety standpoint not to have any driveways on that strip of land on Damascus? Is the incremental monies received worth the cost if there's a large truck versus school bus accident with Cottage Grove or Monona kids on board? For those of us my age from Monona, we think Barry Johnson. Barry Johnson was a Monona volunteer firefighter driving a fire truck who was killed by, I believe it was a dump truck, or I don't know, somebody knows. But I mean, we don't want, when I first went out to Cottage Grove, I thought, boy, that was really smart, not to have any driveways on that entire stretch of land. And I thought that was purposeful. Instead tonight, anyways, can you sell those parcels to people who live on the east side of Damascus for larger backyards over time? Is the incremental amount of money that you're going to, so that, just over time, I believe that there's about 10 parcels. When somebody wants a parcel to have a larger backyard, can you sell it to them? And, the difference, the incremental difference between selling it to somebody who wants to build like perhaps 10 houses with 10 driveways, with 10 cars backing out, with perhaps 20 kids playing baseball or whatever, kickball in their yard and running out onto the street at 3:15, 3:30, going after their beloved kickball. All the chaos that can happen, is it worth that, or should you just either keep the land as a nice green space, or better yet, just sell it over time to the people that live on the street on east of Damascus, so for them to get larger backyards. Then also, third thing, for the Cottage Grove parents who want to build a second high school in the past 20-25 years, maybe the way that they can learn that that they don't have any support is to have an advisory referendum in August. I'm in favor of the school and I'm in favor of November, but can you have an advisory referendum in Cottage Grove, in Monona, where you might have to vote on it, for that matter, for tonight, and so they can gauge that they're a minority in a very, I'm guessing a very distinct minority in both communities, because we need them to come on board if we're going to pass the referendum in November. If they're either sit at home or they vote as a protest gang, as a protest vote against this, the whole thing could go down. Then the last thing I want to talk about is, I understand that just the science, that the company that had the survey and all that, they felt that there was 62% were favor if you went to 57 million. But is that too, and I know that somebody said that they had been successful in 50 out of 51 school districts. That's great, okay? But is 57 too small? Do we have more needs? Because my fear is we pass some number now, and in X number of years you want to come back, and it's just going to get shot down, with a guillotine. So don't be handcuffed to just a mere 57. I know 57 is probably a safe number based on the science, but is it the right number for this district? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, consent agenda. I'd like a motion for approval of the consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
Moved and
Yes.
seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Recognitions,
None tonight.
correspondence,
None?
administrative report, superintendent's report.
Hey, none. It'll be tied to the facilities.
Okay. That takes us to the policy report. Susan?
The policy committee met on June 20th, and we had invited our attorney, Mike Jolka, to come talk to us because we've run into a couple situations with the old policies, some lack of consistency in some areas, some other
Really?
issues, and I felt like, man, are we back to square one? Not quite, but it was helpful to have him just, he had, their office went through some of them and pulled some policies out that I think we need to look at again, just for consistency. And then there are some other specific ones that we'll be bringing back, but that's really all we ended up doing, because we had some other policies on the agenda that we did not get to. So our next meeting will be July 17 at 9 a.m. And at that time, we'll deal with some specific policies. And we have, again, I haven't met to talk about the agenda yet, but
Okay.
that's it. Dean had a question?
Dean, sorry.
You had, Joka came in and reviewed all of the policies?
No,
Or just a couple of questions on?
His office went through and reviewed several, ones that we had asked, we had had questions about, and then he picked up some other ones where there just were some inconsistency. He works with a lot of other districts that use Neola too, so he was already familiar with some of this, and, that was part of what we talked about, and then, we are gonna be re-looking at our public records, and we found some inconsistencies, that's how we started seeing them, in the student records and those kinds of things, where we need to look at that again, and we wanted to get some advice on that, so that was, it was more just a general discussion is what it was, turned out to be. And we never got to the, actually looking at policies, so we will do that, but he didn't review all of them though.
Okay.
Jeff?
Jeff?
So as a former member of the policy committee, and one who opposed it from the beginning, is it time to look at pulling out of Neola? Because they don't seem to offer us value.
Oh, really?
Well, I guess I made this comment to Mike, I think they've gotten better, for one thing, somewhat more responsive. Secondly, because I'm not wild about some of their organizational issues either with Neola, but the same concerns we had with WASB in the beginning remain, which is that they only have about a third of the policies where they have background material prepared and samples ready. So if you run into a policy that you need to revise, you have to just kind of pick other districts at randomly, and it takes forever. And it's to go through the entire manual, which was our task. At the time, we looked at that as an insurmountable burden. We still do use I still look at their site and look at their policies. We could still call them, but I guess I wouldn't be ready to dump Neola at this
'Cause we
point. It's
still-
interesting, because more districts are going to it. So I think as even more districts go to it, is one who wasn't with it is pulling out, but most districts are not only staying, it's increasing numbers. And I think they'll get better about being more Wisconsin specific, which they try to be, and they are. Their updates they send us are.
When we looked at them in policy, we would read there, and then we would look at 6 others or 4 others of other districts, and
It's just
we're still
'cause-
spending a lot of time.
Right.
And then now for paying Joka to come sit in on the thing.
Well, that was his comment, though. He's worked with some districts where they did not do any of that, and they do regret it because they had policies they didn't even know they had. We did, painful as it was, go through every single one of them. And we still, because it was so overwhelming, are finding things now when we go back and try to work with them that we think need to be fixed. But it's just, hundreds of them. It was a huge amount of work. And would I be ready to dump that? No. At this point, I don't think that would be worth our while. And we've already paid the big bucks. Now it's the same as it would be to be with WSB. It's the same, to get the updates is not that expensive. So it's not, at this point, we're not shelling out a lot more extra money for it. And And I think we can continue, once we review some of these ones that we've already picked up that we need to fix. We could, what our goal was, ever since I was on the board with our original policy manual, was to pick a few series a year and go through them all. And we never were able to do that because they keep sending out, legislature passes new laws and different things kept coming up, and we would spend hours and hours and hours on one or two policies, and we would never get to the actual review part. So I don't know if we'll get to that with Neola either. I mean, but that's why it was helpful to have sort of a cursory view of some of the things, the inconsistencies, and I think, and Dan has gone back with the Neola rep too, to have him go through and pull out all the ones where there's required action, just so we have it like a grid, checklist to kind of go back and index it, and I think that'll be helpful for other districts to have as well. So I think we're still working with them, and it's still a worthwhile relationship. It's just continues to be a lot of work.
Dean?
What is, if, to take this question further, what is our obligation if you discontinue Neola? Do you still have some responsibility because you're using Neola material?
We couldn't use the material anymore. I mean, we'd be done with it. We would have to ditch our our policy
You
right
have
now
to
is
ditch the book you have now.
the whole format
and start over.
Right.
But we've
right.
written a lot of that as our,
Doesn't matter. It's
I-
gone under their thing, and
I
that's
don't
their
remember
rule.
what I talked to you at
The
the
copyright rule was pretty clear about that. So no, we would have to start over with everything.
I was talking to somebody at the convention and
Yeah,
said,
that's-
you need to pull out of there, and I'll tell you how. I don't remember who it was though.
Well, people may have that opinion. That's not my opinion, I guess. So having worked with it, that would not be my opinion or my recommendation.
And that was raised when we were discussing this in the first place, that their
Right.
copyright pretty much locks you in.
Right.
But then they send us bad policy that we have to rewrite.
It's not
Maybe
all
we should-
bad.
It's
Maybe-
not all bad.
I mean, most of it is
It's not all.
decent. It's not all
Maybe we should
bad.
send them a bill when we have to rewrite the policy that we pay for.
Well, that's a choice, and I think we were trying to be responsible about it. That's why we did take it so seriously, and we did make changes. And
Right.
as you know, we took sometimes 3 meetings on one policy,
Nope.
and we did a lot of detail. And we did try to catch some of that stuff. And yeah, they should probably pay us. Particularly Susan, they should pay for the research she does on the statutory stuff.
I charge them for the time I spend researching
But,
one
you know,
of their policies.
We're making ours better at least, and maybe other people who look at ours will make theirs better too.
That's
So
why I'm thinking
it's
we
all
have
for
a
the
copyright
cause.
claim is what I'm saying, because we spent a lot of time
Mhm.
rewriting their policies.
Okay. Any other questions? Moving on to possible action items, the preliminary budget. This is the budget we saw last meeting.
Nothing has changed.
Any concerns with that? Dan, you have comments?
Best report I've ever heard, Jim.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Jared essentially, presented the budget at last meeting, and so, unless there's questions on it, again, just remind everyone, Jared said this is preliminary budget. You have to adopt it now so that, since our fiscal year starts July 1, the real budget will be adopted then in October.
All right, I need a motion for approval of the 2018-19 preliminary budget as presented.
I'll move approval as presented.
A second.
Moved and seconded, discussion? Susan?
It's not directly related, but I really appreciate the work you've done on this. The other document, and I didn't see it in here, but maybe I missed it, you gave us a document the last meeting, that kind of showed how you spent the operational funds, do you remember in the sections?
Yep.
And then, did you tell me that was posted?
So it's
Cause
posted,
2 people asked about it, and I said, wait, I could swear it's posted.
it's posted on Business Services website with budget
Great,
information.
okay.
But I am meeting with Katie tomorrow, so I haven't made any of the adjustments that we talked about.
That's a specific document that people have asked for.
It's definitely on there, cause I looked
Yeah.
that night, it was
I
on,
did
it was on
too.
there at the night of the our meeting was
Right,
there already,
right.
so. So you should be able to find it.
But it's, again, it's really good information. This preliminary budget information is also excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Means we don't kind of a grinding halt July 1st. 2018-19 revised open enrollment recommendations.
I'll start and then
Yep.
turn it over to Jared. So as you recall, state statutes require us to approve open enrollment seats in January. I think the reason behind the statute is so that parents know when they're doing the applications, then, from February to May, whether or not there's, seats available at particular schools. But we also know that when we do it in January, it's really early, and so we have preliminary projections, and oftentimes things change over these next 6 months. And so we historically then have come back in the summer to make adjustments, and based upon our board policy on optimal class size, the numbers that we use as far as to determine whether or not we have space. And so Jared spends a lot of time going through verifying numbers with all of our buildings, and so on. And so we have forth recommendation for additional seats. He'll talk a little bit about that process, but I'll just say up front, by approving these seats, we will not fill all of those, okay? But we're just being consistent, saying if we were to fill every classroom to the optimal class size by the board policy, here's what we could take. We don't have that many applications at every grade level, so I know there might be a concern about, well, we're talking about facilities and not space. We really aren't taking that many kids. But Jared can talk about the process, so you have a better idea, about how many actually we anticipate being filled.
So as Ann had stated, we approved the original number back in January at the January 24th board meeting. Since then, we've obviously, open enrollment application period has closed as the end of April, and we have issued our offers to where those spots are at. The reason that we come back is per state statute and looking at board policy and we use the Board of Education class size goals, so it's not the maximum, and so we track students pretty much starting in December and identify students that have told us that they're moving out. And the reason that we come back at the end of June or the middle of July is due to the fact that the numbers don't stop changing until our third Friday count in September. And at that time, those are become the official numbers. So as we continue to monitor students, when we make our projections in January, we're projecting the number of students that are either going to be moving in or potentially moving out. So what we're seeing right now is, based on our projections, we're seeing some of our move-ins, but we're also seeing some families that move out. And so taking a snapshot as of June 20th, we have some spots based on the number of sections that we've already approved. And the other part of it is we have to issue teacher contracts in May. And so once teacher contracts are issued, we for sure know what the number of sections we're going to offer. So once you start identifying the number of students that are moving out, we still have holding spots in here for new kids moving in, based on our historical data and looking at some of the Vanderbilt study. The other part of it too is, even though we have additional spots that have been listed here, we won't be filling those. An example is first grade. We had approved originally 10 spots in first grade based on the move-ins and outs that we're seeing right now, along with holding a number of spots for potential new ones. We are recommending 6 additional. However, we only received 8 applications for first grade. People cannot go and resubmit an application once it's done. They can obviously fill out an alternative application, but that doesn't affect how our numbers look right now, and it's still based on space. So even though, what we're doing is we're following board policy and we're following state statutes, and that's why we're coming back to the board at this point to say, based on where we're at with our snapshot, these are the new spots that we could take. So where we believe that we will take some new students is at our 4K, and these numbers are very typical of what we've done over the past number of years. We've come in conservative on our open enrollment new spots, and then in June and July we do come back and open up some of those spots. And we do have 4K kids that come into the district that are placed at Learning Ladder, Kids Safari, or even IHM based on more of a daycare situation. And then those kids, when they roll into kindergarten, are going back to the resident community. So, and as you'll see, we're actually asking for 19 more spots. And those spots would be placed at our off-site locations. At our in-house locations, we're getting to our capacities. Is there any questions on that?
I think that's the first time you've mentioned holding spaces open in anticipation that there might be some potential movements or on it. I didn't realize that the statute allows us to do that.
Yes, because we're trying to project how many.
It allows us to make a projection.
If we don't anticipate any growth, then we could be potentially looking at class sizes over our optimal number,
Right.
or at maximums.
Okay,
So-
but it allows us to take into account projections.
Yep, as long as we have a methodology behind that. We
Okay.
can't just say, oh, we're gonna take 10 at every grade level, and we've never seen 10 at every grade level. So that's why we use like a 5-year rolling plus the Vanderbilt numbers.
Otherwise, you could drive a bus through the whole if you
Yes.
wanted to. Avoid open enrollment. Any other questions? So we need a motion for approval of the revised open enrollment recommendations for 2018-19 as presented.
I'll move approval.
Dean moves approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Next, we have the administrative staff compensation. And I'd like a motion for approval of the administrative staff compensation for 2018-19 as presented.
So moved.
Moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Next, the Dane County School Consortium Director Contract. Dan, you want to talk about this?
Sure. So we have a consortium of all of 16 Dane County school districts that are part of our Dane County School Consortium. That's our school to work program, youth apprenticeship, and some of the other specialized programs. Josh Fassel is the executive director. We are the fiscal agent for the consortium. As such, payroll runs through our office. And so the contract and approval must go through our board as well. So we do have a superintendent oversight committee that reviews and makes this recommendation. And so our group met last week, and we're making a recommendation for this contract. And it's essentially very similar to what we and other districts have had, as far as basically a cost of living increase. So the actual contract is on there, as well as the salary for approval.
Dean?
Does every district contribute the same amount or some
Yeah.
proportionate to membership?
There is a flat membership that everyone pays equally, and then I believe there is a variance based on participation as well. So, more kids you participate, the more you pay, so.
Okay, so the salary that's on here is divided evenly?
Yes, so it doesn't, yeah, so it's paid by all 16 school districts.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah,
The salary and benefits are covered by the consortium budget
yeah.
appropriately.
And to be honest, we actually pay in very little. Every individual district is very much grant-based. One of the things that Josh does a great job is applying for grants, and so there are state and federal grants that come in that really fund a large number of the programs. In fact, a good portion of his salary is directly paid through those grants.
Susan?
Then I would move approval of the 2018-2020 contract for the Dane County Schools Consortium Director as presented.
Moved and seconded. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Item 5, the proposal to purchase the real estate. 2, consideration of proposal to purchase real property owned by Monona Schools District. What that means is, what does that mean? It means that we've received proposals to purchase that we can consider for approval. Wording's funny, huh?
Yeah.
That's always, wording's always funny on real
Would it be
estate.
proposal
Yeah.
to sell?
What's that?
Would it be proposal to sell?
It's consideration of a proposal to
Offer to
purchase.
purchase.
Somebody made us a proposal to
Right.
purchase,
Okay.
and we are considering that proposal to purchase.
I'd rather just sell it to them.
What this does is it gives our approval to the process, which the business offices will handle to complete the transaction and actually implement the sale. Susan?
I move approval of the offer to purchase a real property owned by Monona Grove School District, 2 residential development parcels located at the intersection of Killian Trail and Damascus Trail, lots 2 and 3, CSM number 12330, Cottage Grove, Wisconsin, Village of Cottage Grove, Dane County, Wisconsin, as presented.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion. Dean?
I think we ought to, is this a one-to-one sale, or is it competitive bids, or I think we have a little background on how it was sold.
Jared, you want to talk about the process?
Yep. So the district issued an RFP, or a request for proposals, that was sent out to the Village of Cottage Grove list of potential brokers or home builders, along with reaching out to the city of Monona. It was also published in the newspaper and listed on our website. What we are doing, the lands that we have is land that was purchased when we built GDS, and they are the lots that are on the right-hand side. If you're coming into Cottage Grove and turning left onto Damascus Trail, they are the lots on the right-hand side. Once you get past the last duplex, they have never been parceled out. So the board had the opportunity to either look at issuing an RFP to sell them as a whole, or go through the surveying process and plotting process. We have decided that we would issue an RFP. We received 3 proposals of individuals interested in doing that, and those 3 individuals have met all the requirements of the RFP, which required us that they would take the land as is, and we're working with legal counsel to make sure that that sale is done in good faith.
Susan?
I was just gonna say, just for information purposes, given that we heard some comments about this land tonight, at the time the school was built, the intention had always been to sell those lots because there's not enough land there to actually be used by the school district, and that's a discussion that we continue to have over the years, really, making sure there was no possible use for it, because you don't wanna get rid of school land. But there actually were for sale signs up on some of that property when the school was built, and there were no takers at that point. So the intention was always to sell them, and those were interesting points we heard tonight, I think, but it wouldn't cause me to feel differently about them. I think it's a substantial amount of money that it is time to sell them, and I feel that it's time to sell them.
In addition, I forgot, the original long-range facility committee made the recommendation to sell these as well to the board.
Right.
What's the current zoning of the property? And what will Cottage Grove zone it?
They will be zoned to single residence.
Okay.
I don't recall off the top of my head what they're currently zoned at.
Okay. Along those lines, I would comment that when we advertised promoted the original referendum as part, we talked about the financing of that, and at that time we made, I believe, what was a commitment to sell that property and use the revenue raised to offset some of the roads and some of the costs associated with it. We did not do that at the time because the bottom fell out of the real estate market, and we didn't feel we could get fair value. And so we've been carrying the property, and now we believe we can get full fair value. But I believe that we already have a commitment to the taxpayer to sell those properties and to use them. And at the time, it was, the idea was that they would. The implicit assumption was that they were residential properties that we would be selling. If you look at the map, our main entrance to the school district, to the school property off Damascus is before you get to those residential properties. There's the second further entrance is halfway down that block, but the main entrance where you pull into the school district is at Manly, which is before you get to those properties. Dean, sorry.
Are you suggesting that there is a commitment to utilize the funds to offset any development costs we may have in conjunction with
the prior
that area?
Well, we already, of course, offset those costs by, out of general funds and various places. So those. But what that means, I think, is that we take this, we go back into. It's essentially replacing money that came out of other places in the budget.
It's not a legal obligation.
It's not a legal obligation.
It was something at the time.
Right.
This simply would go back into our use for any.
Yeah, and if you ask me, it should offset other costs, development costs that the district would incur.
I think at the time you receive the funds, you'll have an opportunity, and Jared will present options for this board to consider about what to do with the funds.
Yeah, we're supposed to offset some things like the roads and so on, the road construction, but those are not things that we have an option to do anymore. So, right. All right, it's been moved and seconded, is that correct? Yes. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to facilities planning.
If I could just begin, and I mentioned, instead of including this as part of the superintendent report, I thought it'd be more appropriate just to include here. I just wanted to give you an update regarding, since the last time that we met with the workshop, and with regard to communications and scheduling of a community update. So when we met, we had consensus from the board that we should schedule another community update. We have done that on July 10th. Been working this last week on the communication plan about how to get that out. And so we did finalize and began getting things out to the community today, through to all of our parents, through Infinite Campus, through social media, local media, newspapers. And so it was a real team effort, our folks did a great job of an in-house, Katie and Joyce put a lot of time into that this last week. And so the communication's out, and then as we talked about, it will be a very similar session to the one, the previous ones that we have, but particularly the second one in Cottage Grove, where we'll present updated information. So some of the same background information we presented at that time, certainly the final recommendation of the committee, but as well as to make sure we have some background information and some of the questions that have arisen, these last weeks, to make sure that we're prepared to prevent information and answer questions. So again, we will have Jared and myself, as well as members of the FAC there, but of course, if board members, certainly encourage and be really good if you all were there as well. We are scheduling here at the district office on the 3rd floor. And then the next night we have our workshop scheduled, and to continue our board discussion on the process and recommendations.
Did you also add, it looked to me like you also are soliciting staff input?
Oh, thank you.
That's
Missed that one.
was a
Yeah.
nice email.
So I think you were copied on that as well. Internally, that's one of the things we talked about as well, to make sure that's just so critical that our staff is aware, first of all, of what's happening, but as well, we talk about the feedback. And so based upon the board discussion, we did decide to give another opportunity for feedback. And we did create a short survey, and also encouraged teachers or all staff to either complete the survey or reach out to principals or myself. And thought that was really important. Again, a lot of thanks to Katie and Joyce in helping put that together. And so we've talked about, even though teachers aren't under contract in the summer, nowadays through email we do have it's pretty regular communication, and we know that it's reaching a large number of our staff members. So.
Okay. Now, if you look on board docs, there's, and that was in the recommendation, that I think there's a convenient table with the various decisions that we have to make in it. Starting with go with the referendum and the timing and the amount. What we sort of have to do is work our way through that. Of course, we have more workshop time, but if we're a minimum deadline, if we decide we're going to proceed with the referendum, and we have to have that filled out essentially by the middle of August, so that we are prepared to make a final decision on what we're recommending to go on the ballot in November. So we want to proceed down this. The question is, how do we want to do that? And does starting from this work for everybody as a place for us to proceed? Comments? Thoughts? If not, we can dive right in. My proposal is we go down that list, and I think we can, and maybe we can even, we're not making any final decisions tonight, but if we can reach consensus, reach agreement on some of these things, that will especially give you help with the workshop that's being planned for next week, where we can go on that. Some of the things that are important to talk about is the timing. I think we should talk about the go or no go and the timing right off the bat initially. I think we also have to talk about the grade configuration. We have a fairly high priority to talk about the grade configuration, and we have some good some great configuration information here too, right?
Yeah.
Susan?
Yeah, I'm fine with kind of getting a consensus on where we are on a couple of those things. I was a little concerned to see the revised agenda with the end consideration added, because I think it's very important that we not make any decisions on any of it before the public hearing. We made such a big deal out of having a public, a community meeting, and some, we had 3 board members who wanted 2 of them, and there, you know, there was a close vote, the rest of us saw we couldn't fit in 2, but I for sure don't wanna see us make any decisions, even whether to go or not go tonight. I mean, I think this just needs to stay a discussion until after that July 10 meeting, out of respect for the community, since we felt it was important to have that. I think we need to listen.
Yeah, I think that's
So
that's
one thing.
I just wanted to be prepared.
Yeah.
If there's anything that sort of we wanted to put a stake in the sand and get beyond, that would be
And I
something we
would've
do.
felt like I had to vote against it because I feel it would be so inappropriate before the July 10 meeting. But that aside, the other thing I'd like to spend a little more time talking about are the renovations, because I would still personally like to talk a little bit more about Glacial Drumlin, about the Commons area. I was pretty disappointed to hear that the only thing we were maybe thinking of was removing the stage. I just think we need to talk more about that area and see if there's any way to
Okay.
eke out any more change within it. And
I
I think we could also,
think expanding our lunch prior capacity is an important thing to
right,
think about.
yeah, to think more about, because to me that doesn't sound like enough, and I guess I would like to have more conversation about it. So I just wanna make sure we don't, and whether that ends up being in lieu of something else, or whether we do eke out a slight bit more than 57, I don't know, that's the conversation to have to, whether we really, really have to stick with 57 million and not a penny more, or whether we could spend a couple, some $100,000 more.
Sure. Can I speak to a little bit of the
Yeah.
process, what we've been doing,
Okay.
kind of administratively, to prepare for, information for the board? So as you know, the FAC had the list of if everything that we felt was needed was, up to $87 million. And so based upon the recommendation from the FAC of 57, and then that reduced the range of funds available as well for the renovations. We have done some initial work administratively, looking at what we think should be priorities, understanding this is not by any means final, but we certainly want to share our thoughts with the board about that. And so the first run through, that's quite a bit to cut, to get down to that. And you're right, that the GDS Commons Area lunchroom situation clearly was a really important item. It was discussed by the FAC as well as this board prior to that. And so our initial, but the initial proposal to fix that was an addition, which is quite expensive. And so we looked at, is there something else we can do besides an addition that might be less costly that can still alleviate? The kind of the quick one was, well, we could perhaps eliminate that stage area, but does that really, solve the issue? As we've talked more about that, part of the issue as well as the serving lines, not just space for kids to sit down, but how fast do they get through the lines? And so we're looking at other solutions of can we do perhaps a small expansion or different about how we do the serving line, the additional serving lines as well. So I think when we come together on the 10th or the 11th for the workshop, we'll definitely be prepared to share with you our thoughts at this point about possible ways of addressing that. And so.
And when you say an addition would be quite expensive, I'm sure it would be, because
Yeah.
anytime you talk about an exterior wall, do we have a ballpark when you say how expensive are we talking about?
We actually did have all those cost
Yeah, we
estimates.
did, I just wondered if
I
you
don't
Okay, that's
remember.
all right, rather than.
Yeah.
But I'd like to have it that night, I guess, and then.
Yes.
Yeah, I had thoughts even about removing the community room and knocking that wall out so you could enlarge the kitchen serving
Mhm.
area, so I hope you're looking at all that kind of stuff,
Yep.
too, which that's not a wonderful thing to do either, but I just think it's a big issue, and
Yeah.
I hope we really think hard about all the options of what we might go to.
Jeff?
Have you looked at all options like increasing time for lunch to accommodate the people that are going through? Because it makes me sick to think of all the food my kids throw away because they have 5 minutes to eat.
Yeah.
And I know they can have more than that, but when their buddies are done and they're out in the playground,
Yeah.
And,
they're not gonna keep eating.
The work that we've done with Jared and myself and the EUA and Findorf teams have strictly looked at facilities. That absolutely would be part of the discussion with the GDS administrators about scheduling and so on as well. But the other thing I guess I want to make clear is we'll share the discussions and options that we've considered with the board, there's still plenty of time for that feedback from the board to go back, hey, have you looked at this? If there's something we haven't, we still have time to do that. I wanna be clear on that.
Susan?
So, are we kind of challenging each board member to go back and maybe you wanna repost those numbers? So for instance, for me, we need to handle the overcrowding first. That's a high priority, we need to take care of that, and we need to do it in a way that the staff supports the configuration and the community supports the configuration. So I really wanna hear back from, let's say there are like 30 people there. We gave them one more opportunity to come back and talk to us about this configuration. In the actual survey, we only gave them the 2 choices of the options, so, we're still looking at kind of 3, 5, but it's kind of how you configure it. The maintenance, we know we have to do that, so that to me is a high priority. What was kind of concerning about the way the survey went out was it included the building with the overcrowding as the innovations. That was kind of the title of that section, and so there's a kind of some community concept that innovations, are they priorities or are they not? So I think to have 15 minutes of review of what's within the innovation budget is important. We also saw in the survey that there wasn't a high priority for athletic fields, but the truth is, if this is an opportunity to make a $2 million investment that is going to bring the athletic fields back into a position where they're based at least close to where the kids go to school, and we have control over the land rather than, oh, by the way, sorry, we've got somebody else here today, your baseball game is canceled. I think it's important to continue to look at what we can do for a reasonable amount of money. So we do have, and this was a while ago, an estimate on a soccer field at GDS on the back with bleachers and lights. It seems to me that was $1 million. Again, I'm not sure that the survey adequately presented the need or the way to restructure that. So I'd like us as a group, not tonight necessarily, to have those numbers in front of us and look at those again. So I'd say if we could reschedule this and get the numbers posted, again, if you're gonna look at $5 million to do the football field, but if it's 1, so I think those numbers are gonna be really important to help us reevaluate what should be in the 57 million.
Okay,
If
so,
that's the
yeah, so let me
numbers.
make sure I'm clear. So what would be helpful is when you come together next time for the workshop, you have all that specific numbers, exactly what each of those individual projects.
So it's clear there's a section that's maintenance, it's the roofs, it's the,
Yeah.
we cut Mark Scullion's, capital improvement budget every single year when we were cutting the budgets, that's where we started. So we know that there are imminent projects that need to be done to avoid deterioration and safety of the children. It'd be nice to be able to clearly see those and see what that number is, and then, Jeff has that for us, we had that number, he had them kind of.
Sure, we have it all, so, yeah.
I'm saying we should relook at that, see how much we want. Ultimately, I think what we have to do is allocate, from whatever amount we decide we're gonna go forward on, allocate where we wanna do that spending. And I think it would be helpful to relook at those numbers, those financial numbers.
Dean?
I would second the Susan Fox's suggestion that we look at that serving area, because I think that's at least what I've heard informally is that the space for eating is somewhat of a problem, but the space for serving and getting the lines through and things like that. And I recognize that would be more. I guess I was surprised that was not included as one of the options, but I think it needs to be part of it.
It is included. I'm not sure why, let's be clear, that definitely is still,
Being talked about.
yeah.
Along with that,
It is.
Yeah.
an
Sure.
explanation of what is served, because as a former eighth grade teacher, one of my concerns was always how many eighth grade girls don't even eat lunch, and we really needed a salad bar, and we finally kinda had one at Winnequa, but that was one of the things we were hoping to see more space for at Glacial Gremlin, and it kinda didn't happen because of the way the design came out. So I'd like more information even on how those lines function and what the kids are actually served, along with whatever you're telling us, so we're
Okay.
more educated on it. Some of you parents may know that, but
I know.
I don't know anymore. So I'd like to have that included, so.
Are you saying, Dan, it's not an issue, or?
Oh, yeah, absolutely it's an issue. Yeah,
We are-
that's
that is
definitely
gonna
one of
be
the
addressed.
decisions you're gonna have to make.
It's,
For information with regard to space for
Right.
proper serving area and that sort of thing is a legitimate.
So in the initial plan, the recommendation to fix the lunch problem was a major addition. And now what we're trying to do is look at alternative ways of fixing it that are less expensive. Because if you choose to go with the addition, that means you're gonna have to, assuming you're gonna stick to 57 million,
Well, yeah.
that means you'll have to cut away something else. So those are all choices that you can make, that we'll talk about.
Eric?
So, Dan, I think what Susan Manning was saying, and Susan Fox a little bit, where I see all the numbers and the breakdown, but where I have a hard time understanding is with the renovations and expansions.
Yep,
Because originally there was, with the original proposal was $35.2 million, and with the revised proposal, there's allocated 8 to 8.8 million. So that means that's a significant cut, and I would like to see where, how much was cut from the Cottage Grove expansion, what is the Taylor Prairie. When we're talking about Glacier Drumlin, it was listed at 6.3 million in renovations.
Right.
How much is still allocated to that? That would be helpful for me to see those.
yeah.
Right,
So-
the specific breakdown of that
Those items, yeah.
to 8.8 million.
Yeah. So what we're working on now is to do exactly that, to present to you, here are our thoughts about how to get down to that lower number.
Yeah.
With the idea, it's a first draft and it's gonna change.
Sure.
But yes, that's what we'll have for you by the 11th.
Okay, and then also, for the athletics, and I agree that we should wait till the community gets a chance to talk at the, July 10th or 11th, when
Mhm.
that is. But I'm curious to hear what they have to say about possibly, maybe, splitting the referendum to an athletic one and, facilities.
Well, one thing on that point, to be clear, state statutes have now changed. You can only have 2 questions on the
Okay.
ballot. And so if you're gonna have an operational question, you're limited to 1 facilities question.
Gotcha. So we're limited to 2 questions only
Yeah,
Per year,
per year.
per calendar
So-
year, 2 questions per
Yeah.
calendar year.
So if we have to ask the operational question, and then the only gives us an option to ask 1 facility.
correct.
It's amazing.
And furthermore, it also says that the questions have to be the regular spring and fall elections.
Right.
And my question would be, there's not a November 19 election?
Correct.
Is there? So
Right.
is that, were you precluded from having a November 19 referendum?
Yes.
It has to be
Okay.
spring,
And that restriction, it says that the statute says calendar year, so if you did one in November, you could come back in the spring, as I believe,
That's my understanding,
in my
yes.
understanding, it says calendar year. But then we couldn't do one in November, we could,
Yeah.
Dean?
As I emailed Dan and Jared my concern about one of my considerations are going to be to what extent this adds to maintenance cost, because operational cost
Yeah.
basically is what I'm looking at. And so it seems to me that when we are adding structure or remodeling structure to some extent. I would like to see some estimate, or even rough estimate, as to whether that reduces operational costs or increase operational costs. For example, I would assume to some extent that when you expand the serving area, which I think needs to get done, there are perhaps operational costs that may come with that. They may not, but I assume there would be. I guess I'm not rejecting all operational costs, but I'd like to see those, I'd like to see the ongoing cost and not just the capital cost associated with this, because this cuts into our ability to attract and retain and to pay for a lot of the other things that we're doing. That's why I'm concerned about some of the maintenance issues, because if we can get some of that maintenance stuff we know we're gonna have to do done as a part of the initial capital cost, that ought to relieve pressure on the operational cost down the line. Am I making sense on
Yep.
on this? So.
Jeff?
A couple of things. First, what will affect a lunch by taking the 5th grade out of there, because that takes a good chunk of.
Sure, so that's it.
And,
You-
and the second thing is, I think it's completely appropriate for us to discuss some of this stuff tonight and come to a minor consensus, because it's totally in pencil. I mean,
That's the
anything
point,
we
everything
decide,
we
if
decide
we
is in
decide,
pencil.
if the board decides we wanna go, like, things can change when we listen to more of the community, but I think it'd be good to go in with a small blueprint of, yes, we wanna go, yes, we wanna go in November, or no, we don't, and then we can obviously change, because nothing here is said, but I think it'd be good to start the community meeting coming up with where the board thinks we are at the moment.
So when I just real quick, and we'll talk more in depth at the workshop, but on the lunch piece, because that is a huge piece here. Right now, we have 4 grades. We run 4 lunches through. So if this plan is adopted and approved to move 5th grade out, in the short term, logic would say, yeah, you'd have 3 lunches. And so that would be substantially improve the situation initially. The problem is, though, we expect future growth. So even though there's only 3 grades, as those enrollments keep going up, if you're gonna stick with 3 lunches and more kids have to come through, it's one thing to have space for them to sit, but more importantly is how fast can you get them through the line. So without question, we need a solution to have more serving lines. In the first year would be better, but for a long-term solution, we have to look at that. Yeah, so I want to make sure everyone understands that has to be part of it. So what we're looking at is, can we increase that? Is there enough space to do some reconfiguration within the footprint, around the kitchen, or maybe a very small addition? That's what we're working on now for an option.
Does anybody is there anyone who has an objection to the initial resolution, recommendation that we proceed with a referendum? Is anybody, and I'm not asking about, a decision in terms of the community, but, does anybody have a strong feeling? I would actually put those two together, whether or not we should go with a referendum and go in November of 2018. Are there any strong objections, or is anybody uncomfortable with us moving forward on that? Because essentially what we're going to be doing this summer is moving forward with that presumption. I mean, our whole schedule is that presumption. And does anybody object to that, I guess, is the question.
I think as a matter of having a consensus, I'm fine with it. I just don't see any reason to take any votes.
No,
or anything.
right.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. I just want to make sure we had that option if there was something that came up that we wanted
Yeah, sure,
to.
Well, I'll say that I looked through the data, and it's very good data. So, I mean, the numbers are very good from a statistical standpoint and a mathematical standpoint. So, I trust the recommendation of 57 million. I think it's very important to consider that. And I trust that what the data says, that the community would support a referendum going for that amount, 57 million. I feel comfortable saying that. And I also think it's important, if we are going to do it, that would be on the November ballot. So that's how I feel about it. But I am think it's very important to get community feedback, even though we've gotten some, to wait till the meeting in July.
Susan?
Well, if you're still trying to get consensus.
No, it sounds like
I
it.
feel like
I think I have it already. I have it right now. I just wanted
I
to
just wanted to get back to,
explicitly state it.
I hope that on July 10, we will talk a lot about the two existing schools, Taylor Prairie and Cottage Grove, in terms of the whole grade configuration question, because that's one that's still bothering me a lot, and I know with that survey you sent out, and we're gonna get a little more input on that, but I think that's
What is it, Sue?
the Taylor Prairie and Cottage Grove School, whether we're gonna stick with kind of with one option, which was pre-KK, and the other school would be grade 1, 2, or whether we're still gonna have discussion about whether they both might be 4K2. Cause I think I personally think there's some real strong academic reasons to do that, educational reasons, and I understand, and I think there are also some benefits to parents and families, but there was among the staff, there were clearly more staff who favored the pre-K2 configuration, but among the parents, there was slightly more preference for the pre-KK, and I just worry about the numbers of really little kids in one building, and when we do pre-KK, that seems like a lot of, I mean, and I don't mean to get into it tonight, cause I think we're gonna do that more on the 10th, but I think there are concerns with that, and then, you don't have, the role models of the grades 1 and 2 kids, and it's just a very limited kind of school. And maybe we'll decide that is in fact what we want, but I just wanna take another look at it, and hopefully we'll have a little more input then to talk about that, the pros and cons, cause there are pros and cons to both, both scenarios, and
There are.
I think there are
I'm
pros
still under
and
the
cons to
impression that
everything.
we've killed it 5 times and it keeps coming back.
So, what my impression is we killed was was having all of them be pre-K 5 schools, that we didn't wanna do, which that still makes sense to me. This was an interesting compromise that came out of the facilities committee, and it was one we had not talked about as a board before, and I thought it was kind of intriguing, and I do see some benefits to it. I do have, I have some I do have some concerns and thoughts about pre-KK, 1, 2, 3, just a lot, and even within one family, I'm thinking you could have your kids, when you think of parent engagement and parent involvement, you could have your kids in 3 different elementary schools, pretty easily, most likely would at some point. And I just think there are a lot of things with that, and then when you think of a few hundred pre-KKers in one building, and that's it, that's a lot of really little kids, and I don't know. So I just want us to look more at that and talk about more, with the additional input you're getting from staff.
I was under the impression we killed and should kill community schools because you have to draw boundaries and split the community. It doesn't matter what the school is. And that's kind of what I've got out of every meeting we've had and talked about it, so.
This was sort of a compromise, cause it is drawing boundaries, but only for the first few years, and then they're all together from grades 3 forward. So it was kind of a compromise in that sense. So I think it is a little different than having pre-K 5. And I'm not sure we wanna do it, I'm just saying I want us to talk about it more and think about the pros and cons of the different configurations more, with the additional input that we're getting.
Susan?
I would agree. Again, I strongly support meeting the needs of our kids in this district, and the overcrowding is very clear. And so the best avenue and the best way to do that, hopefully we'll support as a board, and we'll go forward in a way that's timely to meet the needs of the kids based on the predictions we have for enrollment.
Good. The building we're talking about, 3 to 5, with 9 sections. How was the 9 sections arrived at?
Right, so back when the original committee, Long Range Facilities Planning Committee, and then this board had done some preliminary look at those options in 2015. At that time, we were working straight off the enrollment study, so we didn't really have any discussion about educational impact on the size of an elementary school. And we just were looking at, okay, to match up the number of sections. So the number of sections that would be left in the existing schools, the new school, we talked initially at a 10-section school. That would allow growth, based on the projections for at least 20 years. One of according to my notes, one of the discussions that came out of that workshop was we need to do a little bit more research about what is the optimal size of an elementary school. And so during that discussion, and we have direct experience with Winnequa, where it's approaching 600 students and how that functions as far as number of sections, administratives, the student services support, and so on. Based upon that, and keeping in mind we want this to be a long-term solution for growth, right now we are recommending it be a 9-section school, because that will allow for growth as well as be a more manageable size, school. And 9-section being at the optimal class size, with the understanding, way down the line, you can always add a few more students.
What is
So
Winnequa?
right now, Winnequa is about 580, 585, and so it's gonna hover around that 600.
In terms of sections, how?
Oh, never, most of them are either 4 or 5 sections per grade, because that's pre-K all the way through 5. So where this would only be 3 grade levels. Be a little bit
So
different
it's
that way.
essentially it's twice as many students per grade,
Yeah.
but there's fewer grades.
But that is something I wanted to lay out for you to consider when you're having this discussion at the workshop, so you can see those graphs of 9-section versus 10 and what that would look like.
Okay. Now, in 9 sections, I calculate 621 students. So like a 650 building it's 9 times 23 times 3.
For 3rd and 4th grade, I believe the
Small.
class size is 23.
Right.
One of them, it goes up to, no, 3rd grade is only 22.
Yep.
And then 4th and 5th is 23. So it's
Okay,
actually,
slightly
yeah.
smaller, so 610 or something, 612. Okay.
Dan, does each section equate to about 1 FTE teacher?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, with our ratios, it's, what are we at about, in elementary school, we're about 14, 15 students per professional staff member, I believe.
That sounds
something
about
like
right, yeah.
So it's about one
Yeah.
and a third or so.
So when we're trying to project how much staff would we need for like student services staff and so on, we use Winnequa as kind of a model about how we have there for approximately 600 kids. Now,
Okay.
to give us an idea there. So essentially what we're looking at, if that was filled, probably 1 psych, 1 counselor, 1 social worker, and then likewise with the same ratios with our, paraprofessionals and so on.
Do all the specialized and support classes have separate operating spaces? Or do they have offices and work in a regular classroom? You follow what
Right.
I'm getting at?
Well-
Or some combination, I presume.
Yeah, they'll get into the design, which we've had some initial discussions about that. That would come more after the referendum to make the final decisions on design. I will say that the trend is more that we want flexible spacing, that if we have some small group space, it could be used by a special ed teacher, it could be used by a reading teacher, it could be used by a gen ed teacher, as opposed to here's your special ed room, here's your reading room. We want more flexible.
I've seen maps of Winnequa School, which have a whole classroom that has been in the past.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about now. So they take a 750, 900 square foot room and they assign it, call it special ed.
Right,
And there may not be occupied all the day, and if any event, there's not 25 kids in there in some cases. So I realize that's a building in which the existing space is
Right.
being used as needed, but when you plan it, a lot of the, I'll call them specialists.
Yep.
Specialist functions usually have to work in an existing classroom
Yeah.
or have some special places
yeah.
to work and that sort of thing, so.
I'm pretty
So
confident,
when we talk about, what's the term, sections?
Section.
yeah,
So we talk about sections, do we include, information like that?
yeah. So that when the design comes, that will be part of it. I'm confident saying that the design, the trend will be more like, as you said, that specialists have an office area to work with, and then we have those other spaces for working with students, because it's so flexible.
Or at least
Sometimes it's
smaller
into the,
breakout areas.
exactly,
Sections at Taylor Prairie are 8 for kindergarten, 8 for 1st grade. Cottage Grove is 8 for 2nd grade, 7 for 3rd, 7 for 4th.
right,
And then Winnequa's a little bit lower.
yeah.
It's bigger.
So that's where we're,
It's 5 and 4 usually, right?
correct,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, we've had some 3, but mostly they're 4 and 5 now. So, but that's kind of the comparison, looking at our current third, fourth, and fifth, they're all seventh grade, right, or 7 sections right now.
Anything else? Anybody else have any questions? Is there anything more that you would like from us tonight to talk about?
Well, what I've heard specifically, I mean, to make sure that on the cost estimates for the specific projects, we have all that data, but let's make sure we have it concise, so you can really see exactly where we're at. Where we're in, we'll talk about where the planning we've done up to this point about prioritization, so you can react to that and offer feedback. So I mean, certainly that was part of the plan, is all this information we have is to have it hopefully, packaged in a way so you don't have to sift through hundreds of separate reports, that it's all there for you, that you can have to do those discussions. With the grade configuration, we've had a lot of the stuff that was done back in 2015 on pros and cons. We've done some additional work on that since then, and it really hasn't changed much. We know that we prefer less transitions. We also know there are huge challenges when you start trying to put together attendance boundaries. And so it's really, does one outweigh the other as far as the balance? And so we'll try to bring a summary of all that again, for you to consider as you do your discussion.
The thing about community schools, and I'm gonna keep harping on it, is that they look great, and the community is gonna probably want it, but in reality, it doesn't work, and it tears apart the community. So, I mean, and we've talked about this, right? I mean, Sun Prairie just did it, and it was a mess. So, I don't know what more, I mean,
Yeah.
it's gonna cost us.
It creates challenges, but there are also districts we can look at as models that have done a very good process in establishing those attendance boundaries. DeForest just went through it, and I think they did an excellent job with theirs. There's always going to be people, if you have to change schools, that's never easy. But yeah, that's what we need to talk about. And as Susan said, the thing that I think is different about this plan, why it's kind of coming back, is this is a different plan than the board considered before. It's for less grade levels. And we already have 4K students all over the place at different buildings, and so we're only talking about 3 additional grades.
Right.
So I think that's the difference in this
But
plan.
you're still talking boundaries, and
Absolutely.
he said, she
Yep.
said, mine is better than yours. I'm selling my house, and mine is a better school than theirs over there, so you better buy my house, because we're the best school. It's just,
Yeah, but we're not talking about high school.
I know, but still.
We're talking about
Yeah, because
4K2.
4K2, where parents are most crazy about.
And to be honest, it's probably something that sooner or later this district, not for the foreseeable future, sooner or later this district is probably going to have to
I think it
proceed
works.
to when there's enough eventual growth in Cottage Grove. We're not
Right,
gonna,
and I think it works if there's more than 2, but when there's 2, you have a.
I don't know if the
And
number
in Sun
makes
Prairie,
a
they just had a
difference.
problem with, we didn't want those kids in my school,
Mhm.
and when they divided the things equally, they voted all the board members out who did that, because I don't want those kids in my school. And we already have a Monona Cottage Grove split, why would we have a Cottage Grove Monona split? Now we're just.
I guess
fighting.
just the only thing I would say,
Stack those
I
guys.
get those are real political issues that districts face. I guess what I would want to try to hopefully have the board focus on, though, what is best for kids.
Exactly.
Understanding the political part of it, but ultimately, the reason this is on the table for consideration is we know less transitions are better for kids.
Well, if we're gonna do that, then what is best for kids? Probably the high school out there, switch this, that's probably best for kids, but it's not a realistic thing to do.
Right.
So, what is best for kids is great. What is best for kids is we have 15 kids in a class, but we also have to realistically, what is best for
Agreed.
kids is not failing this referendum, because
Right.
we split
Yeah,
this.
agreed, and that's why this may not happen, because of the other issues that you're talking about.
Right.
But I think we owe it to have the discussion.
But like I say, I think we've had the discussion over and over and over and over, and keeps coming back like a zombie. I don't know what to do, it's like eating my brain. So,
But Jeff, we're gonna have to make that decision again, whether we like it or not.
Okay.
Because we gotta come to a referendum
Right.
that we're required to, we're gonna be required to make those decisions or come close to it.
Okay, so I think at our workshop, which will be on the 11th, we should be prepared to make a lot of decisions about what's on this
Yep.
matrix.
I guess
And hopefully we can.
Yep.
move ahead.
the only other thing I guess I'd share is between now and then, if other ideas come up of, we didn't talk about tonight, please make sure you have this information or that, please don't hesitate to ask, to make sure we have it for you.
All right, future meetings. As I said, there's a workshop on, the community update is the 10th, and there's a workshop the 11th. Where we're going to
Yep.
hash some of this out.
And I guess just a reminder, I don't know if everyone has yet, last meeting, those of you that might have some vacations or you're gonna be out of the district this summer, to please let Joyce know. I know for sure a couple of you have, but if you haven't had a chance and you know you're gonna be out, please let her know. So in case we do need to schedule some additional meetings.
Okay?
You think that we can have this done by, one update and one workshop?
We'll have to have another workshop, I guess.
Not this group.
How long is this workshop? 2 days?
I think you can do it.
5 hours?
Until we're done, Dean, until we're done.
That's the way the meetings usually
That's
last, right?
I'd like a motion to reconvene into closed session per agenda item C for completion of consideration of enumerated subjects of business.
So moved.
It's been moved and
Second.
seconded. Roll call vote starting with Dean.
Aye.
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 Okay. For the public, we will adjourn from closed session. There won't be any more open session for the rest of this evening.